Welcome to the Green Goddess Podcast, where we explore sacred medicines and the evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Tara. Our guest today is Anna Holub, an expert and teacher on the subject of forgiveness. She works with entheogens. She's also a counselor, a poet, and an author. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much, Tara. Great to be here.
I'm really happy you're here, and I know that you're going to talk to us about your work with the African plant teacher, Iboga.
Right. Very, very powerful plant.
Yeah, so I know it as sort of the African equivalent of ayahuasca, but except that it's known to be more of a masculine plant spirit, and that the visionary experience with this medicine lasts for days instead of for hours. So, how did you get involved with Iboga?
Well, it's really a great story, and I'm happy to tell it. It really started when I went to Mexico and was offering a forgiveness workshop down in a place called San Pancho, which is near Sayulita. It's on the Pacific coast of Mexico. And some people were arriving, and one guy arrived early to the workshop, and he was really quiet. He was an American guy, and he was pretty young, like in his early 20s, it seemed to me. And so I was just chatting with him, and I said, "Oh, well, what brings you here?" And he said, "Oh, I came here because I was a junkie for 6 years," which would have meant he started like when he was about 16. And then he told me that couldn't he couldn't kick his habit, and he tried everything, and he thought, well, I'm either going to die or I'm going to end up in jail, so I need to do something. And he found out about Iboga and Ibogaine, which is the alkaloid that is sometimes synthesized from the plant and used just on its own. So he went down to Mexico, he found a clinic, and he did a flood dose of Ibogaine, and he was cured of his addiction. And so he was so excited by that he said, I just grabbed a broom and started sweeping. I would just do anything just to stick around and learn this. So that's what he was doing. He had already been sober for, gosh, probably about a year when I met him. And he told me all about this plant medicine, which I had never heard of before. And I thought it was interesting that he was coming to my forgiveness workshop. So he started telling me what he learned from his flood dose. And it's a psychoactive plant, so it takes you on a journey. And he told me that he discovered from his lessons from the plant that he said, yeah, it showed me why I became an addict. It showed me everything about my family dynamics. It showed me not only that, what about addiction in the world. And then he said, and it showed me I did nothing wrong.
Mm.
And I was so moved by that. And I knew that that had really helped him. It had healed something very deep inside of him. And I thought, wow, this plant is doing forgiveness medicine. I really need to know more about it. And
Ah,
then,
okay.
yeah, so I got inspired by this idea, kind of came right in that conversation. And I thought, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of helping people to heal in this big, deep way. And I thought, I'm going to need to have my own experience with this plant medicine at some point so that I won't just be saying, oh, that's nice. I'll be actually knowing when I work with people as they are coming off of their addiction, no matter what kind of addiction it might be, in the integration work and the forgiveness counseling that I do, then I would have my own connection to the plant. So some years went by, and I stayed in touch with this guy actually. And then in 2016, I returned to Mexico and I went to the Ibogaine conference that Gita put on. That's global Ibogaine Therapist Alliance, GITA, and they put on this conference, and he was there, and I ended up connecting with him and then going with him, and he had since become a provider, and so he was the one who was my provider along with some other people to help me go on my journey with Iboga and Ibogaine. I ended up doing what's called total alkaloid and also Ibogaine, both in my flood dose. But I want to explain that I did not go to Africa and I did not chew the bark. And so there are some people who feel like that's the best way to do it. And it's certainly the um, indigenous way of doing it. And I have a lot of honoring of that. It's just that that's not what I experienced.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you experience?
Well, gosh, it was so amazing and so deep. Like you said, it lasts a long time, and it people go through all kinds of different things on this medicine. So I'm just going to tell you my story, and keep in mind that as different as people are, that's as different as the experience could be. So I had no idea what I was walking into. I tried to keep an open mind as much as possible, and I realized that I had plenty of subtle addictions, even though I didn't have any major substance abuse going on, or I didn't have any real major behavioral addiction. But, um, in all honesty, I could see how I was definitely looping some negative thoughts in my mind, which were more subtle addictions that weren't doing me any good. So I came to the medicine with a lot of humbleness to say, okay, please help me. One of the things I'll share about a subtle addiction that I named, which is connected to a whole bunch of stuff. But the way it was showing up for me was that I was getting mm, really anxious about the future. And I
Hmm.
realized that I didn't really have peace inside of myself, inside of my mind, because I felt like, gosh, what if something really awful happens? And I think that was related to some trauma that I had in my earlier life. So that kind of it makes sense that when we haven't finished our past, then we look out into the future and it seems scary. So I knew that I was wrestling with that. And I had done a bunch on my own, but I came to the plant, and as the ceremony was beginning, that was one of the things that I prayed about, was that I really wanted to have an experience of peace now, and I wanted to be able to look into the future of my life with no fears. So I was really blessed by having not only this young man, but another more seasoned practitioner, provider there, and also a couple from Germany who had worked a lot in Gabon with the Bwiti practitioners there, and they were there, and they brought a bunch of music and a bunch of rattles, and they stayed with me the whole time, and they were super into it. So I had actually four people with me, and I didn't plan that, but that's kind of how it worked out. And so we did some prayers, we made an altar, I took the medicine. It took a while to come on, and I remember thinking, oh well, nothing's happening, maybe, gosh, should I take some more, or is that going to really blow me out? Maybe I'm going to be one of the people that has nothing, that has kind of no big experience. And then I realized, okay, just be here, just get patient. And then they started me out with looking in a mirror, and I guess this is one of the things that they do in the various African cultures that works with this medicine, is that they put. I was sitting up and I was looking at my own face in the mirror, but they drew some small designs on the mirror so that it looked like the mirror was kind of cracked. So I couldn't see my face as it would appear normally. It looked slightly off. And they did that on purpose to help me to break open my own mindset and to help the medicine start coming on. There's also a candle right in front of me, and there was lots of music and rattling and shaking going on. So I just looked at my face. That's what they said. Just look in the mirror. And they said sometimes beings either from your past or beings that are going to support you on this trip will come and you'll see them in the mirror.
Hmm.
So I'm sitting there looking at the mirror and nothing's happening. And I'm thinking, all right, there's nobody here. And then after a while, I realized, and this was the very beginning of the trip, was when I looked at my face and I realized that I was no longer being critical. It's like that whole conditioning of looking at my face and looking at what was wrong with it that I had received from being a female person that grew up in the United States. That whole female role belief system conditioning just dropped. And I was able to just simply look at my face. And that in itself was a real revelation because I felt like this kindness coming on and a curiosity. And then I realized, okay, something really is happening here. So after a while, I
Did
laid down.
let
Yeah.
me ask you a question about that. Did that stick
Yeah.
with you? Did
Did
that
I?
gift stay?
Oh, was I able to retain that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I still need to work with it. That conditioning is really, really strong. At
Mm-hmm.
least for me, I drank the Kool-Aid on that one, and I know a lot of women and girls go through that as well, and
Yeah.
boys and men in their own way too. But for my direct experience, that's what I have, and so I need to remind myself. But that was very moving to me, and then I could tell something was really happening because of that. There
Mm.
was a certain softness that started to happen where that conditioned veil dropped. And I could feel that the conditioned veil itself was a harshness, right? So if it wasn't there anymore, it gave me space to simply contemplate myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so then I laid down and I began to have a lot of visions. Um, so that's when I started to have the first visions that I had were of a man and a woman. And it was interesting because I was thinking, well, am I going to have any visions? I don't know. And I had a black, what do they call those, like sleep mask thing on my face because it's as dark as it can be is it just makes it easier to see the visions. So I'm wondering, am I going to see anything? And then into my field of vision comes this image of a man and a woman kissing. And I thought, is that what is that? Am I seeing something? Oh, it looks like a man and a woman are kissing. And then I thought, oh, is this going to go into my whole sexuality? That could be really quite fascinating. And so I'm all ready for that. But then I realized, oh, the people that are in my vision are actually my mother and father. And then I realized that I was watching them making love to conceive me. And that was really huge for me. Um, so the Iboga medicine started to really teach me about the moment that I decided to come onto this planet this time around.
Oh, wow. What did you learn?
Yeah. Well, gosh, I realized pretty quickly that one of the reasons why this was coming up was because my parents decided to, or my mom anyway, was advised by my grandmother and her sister, my aunt, to have a baby right away because my parents had lost a child. So I have an older sister, and then I had a brother, and the little boy died at 5 years old.
Mm.
So they thought they were done having kids. They were just going to have these two kids, but then the boy died, and he had only died a couple of months earlier. So when I was contemplating my parents, I actually the one of the things that happens in these amazing psychoactive entheogenic spaces is that we start feeling everything. We feel not only ourselves, but we feel everybody who's in the vision. So I was feeling my father and I was feeling my mother in the grief that they were in from having lost a child.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I realized that was what was going on. And then I saw the difference between how my father could handle it, but my mother was really, the word that comes to me is decimated. She was, it was like she didn't really have an egoic structure to even be able to integrate the grief that she had.
Wow.
And my father, by making love to her, was trying to like resurrect her in a way. It was very loving and beautiful, but it was also full of grief. And I started to cry. I can feel it right now. I mean, it's like huge. So I just, in my trip, I'm lying there on the bed and all the music is going, and the rattles are going, and the candle is on. And I just started to wail because what I was doing, and I knew I was doing this, was I was releasing the grief that I was born into. I mean, this was what I started my life in, was this pool of grief,
Wow.
which I have been aware of for a long time. But this was just helping me to really get in there and feel it and feel my mother, my father, the spirit of my brother who left, myself coming in and making the choice to come, and also myself currently as a mother, because I have two kids. And so part of my wailing and crying was just the grief of, oh my gosh, what if one of my children died? I would totally lose it. So I did. Like I was compassionate with my parents that they had just lost a child. And then I started to tune into everyone on the planet who's ever lost a child. And then I really started to cry. And I had to just let that whole wave move through me. And I knew that there was no way out but go through it. So I
Hmm.
just cried and cried until that part was over.
Wow. So that sounds like a really profound experience of deep empathy.
Yeah. And clearing, a
And
super
clear.
amount of clearing. And
Yeah.
I want to mention too about the forgiveness part. I've been focused on forgiveness and my experience with my mother, because it turned out, she gave birth to me and then gave birth to my daughter. I mean, my her other daughter, my sister, and then we grew up. And by the time I was 23, she had deepening mental illness. And one of the thoughts that I've always had in the back of my mind was that her her depression and her manic depression may have been triggered by the intense grief that she went through by losing a child.
Hmm.
So then what happened later when I was 23 and I was pregnant with my first child was that she killed herself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there's so many generational things going on here and so much letting go. So I have, since that time and working through my own journey with what about my mom? What about how I grew up? What about her mental illness? How did that affect me? And then her killing herself when I was 8.5 months pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I was just about to have my first child, and I had no dad because the dad was not wanting to be part of it. I had no money. My father was already really angry with me for getting pregnant in the first place and not being married. There was so much going on. And then my mom killed herself.
Wow.
Yeah. So that put me into a place that eventually became my work with forgiveness. So, this deep letting go process, I have been working with myself and helping clients for the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years. So then when I'm here, I am doing this Iboga journey only 3 years ago, and all of this comes up, and I knew, okay, the medicine is helping me by bringing this up. There's nothing wrong going on here. This is actually a great blessing. And I need to just ride this wave and let it out of my cells, out of my bones, out of my blood, out of my mind, out of my neural nets. So that's what I was doing while I was in the trip and while I was wailing and crying. It was a
Yeah.
huge, like, opening a valve and letting it all flow out.
It sounds like a really overwhelming experience.
Well, to me, it was right at my edge, but I wasn't overwhelmed in the sense of that word, where sometimes people feel like, oh, if I'm overwhelmed, then I'm like close to panic, or that there's a negative thing. And it was incredibly heart wrenching, but it
Mm-hmm.
was also okay.
Mm.
So this brings me actually to what I end up talking at conferences. I met you at a conference where I was talking about forgiveness inside an entheogenic journey.
Right.
Because as we learn that we can just open the floodgate and let it out, let it move, then it's my feeling that there is no bad trip. There's some scary stuff that can come up and some really heart wrenching, awful things that we need to contend with, but I wasn't afraid. I was willing. So just being in that mindset, it helped me so much. And I had had practice. If I didn't have all the practice of letting go without any entheogens whatsoever, then it would have been for sure a lot more difficult, I think, for me to go through that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why in the pre and post integration counseling that I do, and many of us do, it's so important to be so aware of deeply letting go, deeply surrendering, deeply trusting, so that whatever comes up, it's like, okay, it's gonna move. This isn't forever, and I can handle it. I just need to breathe and trust.
So, what are some tools that you give people so that they can practice surrendering?
Well, I teach people how to do this deep letting go. So I wrote a book about it. I have a CD of meditations, and I have these courses online, and all of them have to do with really being present, being aware of our breath, being deeply trusting of this moment, and also letting go, deeply letting go with our breath and with our willingness to learn and to detach from the looping. And this is another addictive pattern. This is how the ego works, as far as I know. And it loops these negative fear thoughts that keep us feeling separate and alone and isolated and
Yeah.
alienated. So we need to learn how to open that valve and let all of our sorrow and fears out. And that's the forgiveness that I do. It's an expanded version. It's not the traditional model of what we learned when we were kids.
Let's talk about forgiveness because that's really the crux of your message and your work. So, what do you feel forgiveness is, and what do you feel it isn't?
Right. Well, when you think about traditional forgiveness that most of us have learned, I started thinking about, well, when did I learn what that was about? And I realized that a lot of us, when we go to preschool or kindergarten, we're old enough to play with other kids, and then stuff happens, on the playground or in the classroom, where somebody might grab our toy, or we might push a kid, and then the adults try to teach us, oh, you're supposed to say you're sorry. So that's an apology. That's different than forgiveness, but it's part of the mix of, if there's a conflict, then we're taught as little ones, oh, you're supposed to say you're sorry. And it takes a while to develop enough of a self awareness to even know what that means. But then the other kid is supposed to say, oh, it's okay. And then sometimes it is. Kids can move on pretty fast. And yet, if that's all we learned about forgiveness is, oh, it's okay. Or some people learn about forgiveness if their family is Christian and they go to Christian church, maybe it would come up, or it might come up in another religious setting. Um, but very few of us are given any kind of map as to how to actually do perform this miracle of forgiveness. So for me, it's not so much, oh, I'm going to forgive that person for doing that action that I then felt like a victim and then I'm all pissed off about. We could start there, but it's not so much that I'm just going to let bygones be bygones and then just figure it's over. And that's a lot of what people say, oh, yeah, I forgave that. But they didn't necessarily go down into their gut, to their all of their emotions and their mental construct about that. They just told themselves, oh, yeah, it's over. I forgave it.
Right, absolutely. So, yeah, in my work as an intuitive healer, what I've experienced is that forgiveness is often a side effect of having just fully processed our pain around a particular incident.
Mm. Mm-hmm. They really go together, don't they?
Right. It's hard to be fully past something while it's still harming you, or it feels like it's still harming you.
Mm. Yeah, and a lot of us are, I mean, just about everybody I know, including myself, we're walking around with some of that old stuff, and
Right.
it can really flare up. Like even today, I was working with someone, and she was really being honest with herself. Like every time she has a fight with her husband, and she starts getting angry at him, she's starting to realize, oh, huh, it's not really him, because this stuff predates the time she ever met him. So these things loop and they go around and around, they recycle in our awareness until we give them a, an opening, like an escape hatch to go out of our system. And that's what I teach people to do, is to have this expanded way of thinking about forgiveness, which is really more a deep letting go. It's a The way I do it, it's a deep prayer. It's not a religious thing, but it definitely does have a spiritual component to it, where we reach out to spirit or life or the God of our understanding, whatever that is for each person. As long as we have an idea, hopefully an experience of something that is kind and is much larger than ourselves, then we can go into our deep sadness and fear and anger and offer it, lay it down. These are burdens that we're carrying, and we can lay them down and we can breathe them out of our bodies as a prayer, as an offering. And it's not that hard, and it's pretty easy to learn how to do that. The thing is, we need to practice it and actually do it.
Mm. Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of your work is um to have people really fully witness their emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean we have to go back through every single detail and relive the whole thing, but we do need to touch on the tender place. And the reason why is because we need to be still enough in order to know that we're not running away from it anymore. And one of the ways that I handle that for myself and with my clients is I always say a prayer that's a spontaneous prayer of the moment, but I say a prayer, an invocation, so that we are in a sacred space, so that when it's time to let go, there's a place to put it. It's into the sacred space. And when we need support, we receive it directly from this grace that we are. So
Mhm.
after the letting go, then there's a reception, a deep reception of light and love. And that is what heals us. I'm well aware I'm not healing anyone. What I'm doing is holding space for the healing to occur.
Okay. So, why are you so passionate about forgiveness right now? What do you think it has to offer the world?
Well, from what I experience, it works on so many levels, and all of these levels are super important for us right now. As I mentioned, I got into this because I grew up with a mom who had deepening mental illness, who eventually committed suicide. And so there was quite a bit of trauma from my upbringing, my childhood. I know I'm not alone in that, and it spurred me to this work. Um, so I see that on a personal level, if we want to become peaceful, if we want to experience deep liberation, we absolutely have to contend with our sorrow and our fear. So, this is a way to do it where we don't spend many years just talking about it. We actually spend enough time to where we can go up, yeah, there it is. And I like to help people find it in their bodies because we tend to park it, in our physical body until we're ready to let it go. And then I help people to release it. So that is a personal level, but there are also other levels that I see forgiveness is so helpful for. One of them is intergenerational because some of this stuff is ancestral. I'm sure you have seen that in your own way in your work. That
Yes.
generation upon generation, just like when we don't know how to handle the pain of the world and the pain of our parents, then we end up passing it on to our kids, and then they pass it on. And so some of this stuff is just old pain.
Hmm.
And when we release it, I feel that as beings, we're so connected that the beings that are in our family line, both behind us and in front of us, so to speak, I mean, that's an illusion that there is a past and a future, but you know what I'm talking about, like the beings that showed up as our family members, generations past and generations into the future, we're all linked. And so when any one of us wakes up a little bit or a lot, we are blessing all of that lineage.
Right.
And I have definitely felt that myself. I went about a year ago to the Czech Republic and to Poland, and I did this whole ancestral healing journey for me and my family, and it was really deep. Um, so I'm actually going to be writing about that. That's my next project, is the ancestral healing and forgiveness angle. And then there's also, even getting larger than that is the planetary level of gender, culture, bigotry, discrimination, all the misunderstandings that we have as human beings, not seeing each other as the perfect, innocent, beautiful children of the Most High that we are. And I
Right.
really feel like, getting back to Iboga, actually, that's the medicine that Iboga does too, because it started with me on a personal level, and then it showed me some stuff um, in my teen years, and then it went into more of a global thing where I saw some things on the planet, and then it went into beyond the planet. So I feel like that's how forgiveness also works. It works, on a nano level all the way to a super cosmic macro level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're at a time right now where we're all of us, on the conscious path are really working to lighten the energy, lighten the vibration of humanity and human consciousness. And it's this kind of work, like what you're doing and what the plants are doing with us, that's accomplishing that. It's the releasing, just as you're saying, and a setting free of humanity. Because, as you said, our core essence is very innocent, and it's just been a cycle of pain passing down, as you said, through generations and just to each other in general. That's brought us all down to the point where we're at now, that we're
Mm-hmm.
healing from. Yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah, and it's simple too. I feel like the way that I do my work is is the more simple we can get, the easier it is to understand and to shift so that we
Mhm.
can receive the blessings and share the blessings.
I'm
I'm a,
thinking,
yeah,
sorry,
go
no, go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that I'm a student of Course in Miracles.
Oh, okay.
So that really informs my work as well. And a big focus of that spiritual text is to receive love and give love. That
Right,
the extension of the love of the divine is the point. The sharing is the point of why we came. And so forgiveness is all about just letting go of what isn't in alignment with that.
right, because we can co-create a really wonderful world together. It
Mm-hmm.
can be even more wonderful than what we experience right now. And that's a wonderful tool for doing that. I was thinking about some other tools for forgiveness that I've come across in my own journey. Um, and I was thinking about the power of acceptance and of finding the benefits of the hardships that we go through in the sense of what they teach us. And also, as you're saying, in terms of the service that we end up doing to help our ancestors release what they're holding on to through us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So when you say acceptance, do you mean just coming to peace with what is
Right. Yeah.
and what
Coming to
has
peace
been?
with what is. Right. Exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting too. I like to think about different ways of perceiving situations and how they change our understanding of what's even happened. And as I've been working with the mantra of there is no self and really exploring what that means, I come to see that we're all just a point of awareness, a God consciousness. And a lot of times we tell this story of what our lives have been and what we've experienced from this point of view of selfhood. And so we make our experiences with others about ourselves and reflections of ourselves. And yet they never really are. They're always really reflections of where that person's point of consciousness was in that moment and what pain they were holding and perhaps what they were projecting and so forth. It's almost never really about us. Almost nothing is ever personal.
Yeah, that's very profound.
And when you think about it, I think too, most of us, all of us really, we go around and we treat each other the exact same way that we treat ourselves. It's just a point of human psychology. So
Mm-hmm.
if we're self-critical, we're going to be critical towards other people. And so I think from that understanding, if we want to become more loving, self-love is the most important thing. And if we want to become more forgiving, self-forgiveness is the most important thing. And I think that that actually can be harder than forgiving other people.
I agree. I feel like the self forgiveness place that we come to, not once, but usually quite a few times throughout our lives, is the most tender spot of all. And it is, in my experience and what I've seen working with people, it is harder. than than forgiving what's outside. But actually, there is no outside and there is no inside. It's this beauty that's experiencing itself right now. And yet, when we feel cut off, then that is the time when we're like in our own little bubble of seemingly private experience. And
Mhm.
I feel like the acceptance that you're talking about does come as we learn how to release the rawness of the pain. So, giving that sorrow, that grief, that fear a place to go by breathing it out, offering it to spirit, then really the next thing that happens is this amazing stillness where we can say, oh, huh, now I feel lighter. Now I feel more at peace. Now I'm in a space where I can actually witness this and see what are the gifts for me. Even within the most horrible things that have ever happened, there are gifts for us on a soul level. And I can really see that with what I went through with my mom and other things that have happened in my life too.
Would you share what are some of the gifts that you've been able to reflect on that you feel you got after she, or as a result of her suicide? Because, gosh, you must have felt so abandoned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I had to realize in this whole path it took me, first of all, it took me about 8 years to even begin to unpack and start to slow down enough to take a look at what was really going on with me. So I have a lot of compassion for, if it takes you a while, if something really difficult happened 15 years ago, 50 years ago, it's okay. Whenever we're ready to wake up to it, that's when we're ready. And I know that for me, even to begin to be ready took me 8 years. And then it took me another 8 years to actually find this forgiveness process and start working with it. So, yeah, I mean, you were asking, what did I learn? Um, One of the first things I had to really take a look at was, even though the suicide itself was just this huge dramatic moment, it wasn't just that. It was that I had grown up with a mother who was in misery from the time that I was conceived.
Right.
So then I really needed to sit with that, um, and realize, well, wait, where's my sense of joy? Because I was a pretty serious kid, because this heavy stuff was in the household and I felt so responsible. And I remember I came in as the rainbow baby that my parents wanted another child to take them out of their grief. So I kind of felt that heaviness the whole time. And I needed to learn to find myself, find my joy, and find my sanity. A lot of times, what we learn is seemingly the opposite of what it seems like we got. So, if I got a major fear of insanity, because watching my mom go get worse and worse, that was really scary. She used to tell me that I was the one out of all the kids that was most like her.
Oh,
So
wow.
when I was a teenager, I had a major dive into some anxiety and depression and drug use and just trying to get out of turning out like my mom, because she told me when I was about 14, oh yeah, you're the one that's the most like me. And I just freaked out. I didn't know what to do with that information. Now I see where she was headed more on a soul level. But at the time, I just was horrified by that. So I feel like I developed, or maybe I came in with it really, and I'm working at this round, a fear of insanity and a misplacement of my own joy. So going through this with my mom has helped me to really wrestle with those things, in a good way, to where I find that the more connected I am to spirit, that's where my sanity lies. And the
Hmm.
more connected I am to spirit, the more I can feel joy. And these are pretty much the opposite of the family soup that I was born into.
That's profound. So, what are some of the ways that you
Mm.
personally cultivate that connection?
Well, I have a daily practice that consists of when I wake up, before I look at any news or my phone or my computer and all that, I meditate and I read Course in Miracles. That's the inspiring text that works for me. And I totally support people to find whatever works for them. But this is what I do in the morning. And so I set my day. I pray. I pray for my children and my family and for all beings. And there are some people that kind of come and go in my prayer list, but I'll review that and send love to them and myself. And I also, when I get in that really nice space, then I send it forward into my day so that it's just rolling ahead of me the whole day. And that's pretty cool. That's more of a newer thing that I've been playing with. I mean, the whole thing's an experiment. So that's what I do in the beginning of the day. I also meditate before I go to sleep at night. It's usually more brief, but I just come into a conscious place of peace. And then I try to be as conscious as I can as I'm going into my sleep and as I'm waking up also. Um, and then throughout the day, I'm doing inner work with people, or I'm writing, or I'm walking in nature. There's a lot that I do to keep myself in a centered space. And there are times when I get really challenged and I'm not so successful, but usually I'm pretty darn centered. And if I'm not, then I forgive myself and I know it's okay and it'll pass. And so I do the forgiveness work that I teach other people. I do it myself. I've done it uncountable times because there's so many layers.
Right. Yeah, I really thank you for sharing that. That's really awesome. I love having kind of a template of one way one could be that works really well. That's awesome. I'm thinking too about when I'm reflecting on forgiveness, how much I've learned from accepting capacity limits of myself and others around forgiveness.
Mm.
I've I had a situation where I think it was a couple of years ago. I went through this like really intense bout of depression and anxiety and things like that. I've had a lot of struggles with through my life, but this time I went through one and I couldn't really pinpoint what was going on. And eventually I had this feeling of like just being overwhelmed with it and like not knowing how to move through it. And then I had this flash of insight that this was really similar to what my mom had felt like when I was growing up. I remembered her like like your mother really struggling a lot with her emotional well-being
Mm.
and oftentimes having difficulty like smiling and um, kind of having a look of pain on her face a lot of the time and not, as a kid, not really knowing what to make of that. But then it was happening to me in that moment. And I realized that was the purpose. It's like spirit was giving me empathy on this really deep level for what my mom had suffered. And it actually evaporated as soon as I had that insight. It was gone. It's so
Wow.
interesting. Yeah.
Oh.
And I'm thinking too, another journey, I had a journey with Aya where it's amazing how these entheogens can take us to these places that we can never go consciously. She took me back to being in the uterus of my mother and how my mom felt. And my mom felt really anxious and unsafe in the world, was what I understood. And as a consciousness that was developing, I knew myself to be very, very vulnerable. And then I felt really unsafe. And that helped me understand why my nervous system had wired the way that it did and why anxiety has been such a challenge. in my world to overcome. It was really profound. But again, it's about capacity for me to understand, both what my mom had gone through and then how I was like you, what I was formed in this life. I'm not, we're way beyond just this life, of course, but our personalities, our survival personalities, as they're called sometimes, or
Mm.
the ego, as it's called, it really does help to have a lot more compassion for yourself and others when you understand what someone's emotional experience is and what their wiring is because of situations way beyond their control, and even in your mom's case, like losing her child being way beyond her control, I'm sure. So it's interesting. It seems like acknowledging that what we wish we could be is not always what is possible is helpful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that about your mom. And I start thinking about your grandma and your great grandma, you know,
Right.
and how this generational, these like energetic patterns, they go through many generations, and how having these flashes of insight like you were describing are so foundationally important for us.
Right. Because once you have those flashes of insight and you have that deep empathy for yourself and others, you're just filled with love. There's understanding, and it's easier to let go of any sense of blame or judgment. And um, or just wanting it to be different in some way. Like there's just an understanding of what is. And I'm thinking too about how forgiveness really relates to judgment, because on a certain level, if there's this real peace with what is, there's no need to judge anything. Judging is kind of irrelevant. It's construct of the mind and the ego, because everything just is. And then passing a judgment about it being good or bad or whatever is it's kind of like artificial and secondary.
Hmm.
So on a certain level, it's like there isn't even a need for forgiveness once there's a really deep acceptance of what is.
Right. So forgiveness is necessary when we are not at peace. But once we
Right.
are at peace, then we've moved beyond the doorway. I see it as a doorway that we walk through. And once we walk through the door, then we don't have, like you said, we don't have judgments. So the judgments are those layers that I was talking about, like taking off the veils and getting more and more naked before God or spirit is how we get to feel free and how we get to feel joy.
Mm,
So I think you're really right when you say to keep it super simple, to see, oh, every time I have a judgment in my mind, that's a way of, as in the course it would say, creating a little fence, creating a barrier, one more barrier.
yes.
And
Yes.
so this work is all about, let's take the barriers down, let's take the layers off. It's like a massive strip tease. We're taking our veils off, and we can actually enjoy the process once we realize, oh, there's nothing horribly wrong with me. I'm not super weird and everybody else has it together but me. That's just another isolating thought. That's not true.
Right.
Yeah. As you were talking about your mom and how she had a sad face,
Yeah.
I was realizing and remembering that, because my mom went, she had a lot of depression, but she also had her manic times. And so she would get really like super energized, but in this completely ungrounded way. And I realized at some point that because of that, I really didn't know what joy was about, because when she seemed happy, it wasn't a real happiness. It was
Oh,
so weird. And then I got scared of that. And one thing that really helped me was to have joy with my children. And when they were really little and they were so free, it was kind of like they were teaching me, oh yeah, so this is how to be a little kid with joy. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I can link into this. I can do this. Yeah, it was very, very important and precious for me.
what I'm thinking about you is like one of the things that struck me about you when we met a year ago was actually that you have a lot of joy that shines out your eyes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's a massive amount of strip teasing in order to uncover this joy. And I'm glad that it can be seen because I want to share it. I feel like we all do. We all want to be happy and share our joy. So that's what this awakening is really about.
I like that. Yeah. And so this forgiveness work is about allowing the love and the joy and the peace that's naturally within us coming from source and within our own hearts, to flow to all parts of our own being and all parts of all because we are all one. We're all one being.
Mm.
Yeah. And then that makes the room for these higher vibrational states of joy because it's really hard to access them when we're holding all this density.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, super hard. That's why I keep saying releasing and letting go and laying down our burdens is so important because we don't have to fix ourselves. There's nothing wrong with who we are. Although, that's a huge idea that we have picked up from our society and our parents, like, oh, well, if I could just fix this part, or if I could just get it that way, and then people will love me and then I'll be happy. But really, that's not it. There's nothing wrong with you or me or anyone on our deepest level.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And you know what that also is bringing in is, I've been and really resonate with as well that, the beliefs that we hold about ourselves, we then create from. So if we see ourselves as flawed and needing fixing, we're going to keep finding stuff. And yet, if we see ourselves as perfect and whole, then we're going to experience that reality. So why would we ever tell that story that there's something wrong with us, consciously? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So So I think our time is about up here, but I really enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you so much, Anna. And we'll make sure to put links to your work below. And if there's anything else you want to mention here before we end, go for it.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Tara. It's been a joy, and I really loved meeting you a year ago, and I'm really glad we're connecting now. And I'll just tell anybody who's listening that if you if you have um, if this piques your interest, there are things that I've been working with, and one of them is the connection between forgiveness and recovery from addiction. So if you're struggling with any of that, there is an online course that I have created. There's also another one just on forgiveness itself, and there are two more as well. They're all on my website. So check it out. Check out my book, Forgive and Be Free. And please feel free to email me, contact me. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay, we'll put your email address below as well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Anna, for the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you for being here and shining your light at this really important time.
Oh, thank you. And you're welcome.
Yes. And to all of our listeners, may the plants be with you.